My parents made me work 2 diner jobs while using my hard-earned money to pay for my sister's study abroad expenses. I always knew life wasn't fair, but I never expected to discover just how much I'd been lied to. That realization hit me one day while I was cleaning out my old bedroom. I'm Amanda, and up until that moment, I thought I understood my role in my family. I was the responsible one, the dependable one, the one who was always expected to hold things together. I believed it was my duty to support my stepsister Jessica as she chased her dreams. But what I found hidden in my room changed everything. "Amanda, don't forget to check the back of the closet." My stepmother's voice floated up from downstairs, that familiar mix of sweet and bossy. "If you find anything from school, we might be able to donate it." I rolled my eyes and sighed, shoving another box toward the door. I hadn't needed reminders about being thorough in years, but that was just her way. Even now, as I helped them prepare to move into a smaller house, she couldn't resist managing every little detail. While sorting through the closet, my fingers brushed against something strange tucked behind the baseboard. Pulling it free, I realized it was an old yellowed envelope worn with age. My name was written on the front in my late father's handwriting. My breath caught in my throat. I sat down and carefully opened the envelope, taking extra care not to tear the fragile paper. My hands trembled as I unfolded the letter, my heart racing when I saw the date at the top. It had been written just weeks before my dad passed away. "To my dearest Amanda," it began. "If you're reading this letter, it means my wish hasn't come true. I asked your stepmother to give you the college fund I saved for you, totaling $50,000. That money is for you alone, to help you pursue your dreams. It pains me to see how Jessica has been favored, overshadowing you in the process. I hope this will help you reclaim your light." The words blurred as tears filled my eyes. A college fund? My stepmother had always insisted there wasn't enough money to send both of us to college. She said I needed to work to support Jessica's education, and I accepted it as my role. But now the truth was staring back at me in black and white. I remembered how happy I'd been when my dad told me he was remarrying. I was excited to have a new mom and a sister, but that excitement didn't last. My stepmother only cared about Jessica, her biological daughter. I'd see it in the way she doted on her while barely acknowledging me. My dad noticed too, and it led to countless arguments between them. Sometimes after those fights, he'd apologize to me and take me out to do something fun. Looking back, I think he was trying to make up for the way she treated me. When he passed away a year ago, everything fell apart. With my biological mom gone too, I became an orphan, and my stepmother didn't even try to hide her favoritism anymore. I was forced to take 2 jobs to keep up with bills and Jessica's ever-growing list of expenses. As I sat there holding the letter, I heard my stepmother call out again, her voice closer this time. "Amanda!" Her footsteps echoed in the hallway. I quickly folded the letter and shoved it into my pocket, my heart pounding. "I'm here," I called, trying to keep my voice steady. When she stepped into the room, I pretended to be sorting through a pile of old-school papers. My hand stayed firmly on the letter in my pocket. My father had tried to give me a future, and she had stolen it from me. I stared at her, no longer the quiet, obedient daughter she'd grown used to. I was done playing that role. At dinner that evening, I finally brought up the letter. My palms were damp with sweat as I set it on the kitchen table. My stepmother was arranging the table settings, and Jessica was scrolling on her phone, probably texting her college friends. Today I found something interesting. I began struggling to keep my voice calm. A letter from Dad. My stepmother froze, her hands hovering above the plates. Jessica looked up from her phone, frowning. "It's just a letter," I said, "but it talks about a college fund. He left $50,000 for me." Jessica's mouth fell open, and her phone slipped from her hand. "What?" she blurted out. "Oh, Amanda," my stepmother said, her voice overly sweet but edged with condescension. "Your father was confused before he passed. He made a lot of promises he couldn't keep. But the letter is dated just 2 weeks before he died," I said, my voice firm. "He said the money was already set aside." Jessica scoffed, leaning back in her chair. "Do you really believe that? Maybe he left you a private jet too while he was at it." My stepmother cleared her throat and added, "Your father and I did everything we could for this family. College is expensive, Amanda. We had to prioritize Jessica's future. My chest burned with anger. What about my future? I demanded, my voice cracking. I've been working nonstop, taking shifts at the diner, cleaning houses, and giving half my paycheck to this household, while Jessica gets to follow her dreams. Jessica smirked, though it looked strained. It's not my fault you didn't do well in school, she said coldly. Someone in this family had to succeed. The casual cruelty in her words felt like a punch to the gut. I glanced at my stepmother, hoping for even a flicker of acknowledgement, but she just stared at me, calm and unmoved. In that moment, something inside me shifted. My father's words from the letter echoed in my mind. Focus on the present. What's done is done. You're right, Dad, I murmured to myself. What's done is done. But what happens next is up to me. The drive to my Aunt Margaret's house after that dinner felt like an escape. I couldn't stand another second of my stepmother's icy indifference or Jessica's smug attitude. Aunt Margaret's small cottage sat on the edge of a quiet town, with a garden that had gone wild with weeds and wind chimes swaying gently in the breeze. It had always been a safe haven for me, a place where I felt seen. When I opened the door, the sweet smell of cookies greeted me. Aunt Margaret turned from the kitchen counter, her flour-dusted apron tied snugly around her waist. Her sharp eyes softened when she saw me standing there. You found the letter, didn't you? She asked, her tone calm but certain. I nodded, unable to speak. My throat felt tight with a mix of anger and heartbreak. Come sit down, she said, pulling out a chair for me. There's more you need to know. She disappeared into her small study and returned a moment later with an old, worn envelope. Placing it gently on the table in front of me, she said, Your father left behind more than just that letter. He wanted to make sure you'd have what you needed. These are the records he entrusted to me. I opened the envelope, my hands trembling as I pulled out a stack of documents. There were bank statements, letters to trustees, and even a recording of a conversation he'd had with my stepmother. My stomach churned as I scanned the papers. The bank statements showed regular deposits made over the years, far exceeding the $50,000 he mentioned in the letter. I realized then that my father had meticulously planned for my future. But 3 months after his death, all the funds had been transferred to a new account, one that was used to pay for Jessica's tuition. He knew this might happen, Aunt Margaret said, her voice rising with anger. That's why he asked me to keep copies of everything. Why didn't you tell me sooner? I asked, my voice breaking as I looked up at her. She sighed deeply, sitting across from me. He told me to wait until you found the letter on your own. He believed you needed to be ready to stand on your own first. Before I could respond, the sound of a car door slamming outside made me flinch. Through the open window, we heard my stepmother's familiar voice, chatting with a neighbor. Aunt Margaret squeezed my hand. If you're not ready to face her, you don't have to, she said gently. But I was done avoiding her. My heart pounded, but I felt a strange calm settle over me as I gathered the documents and organized them into a neat pile. It was time to confront her. The front door opened and my stepmother walked in, her heels clicking against the hardwood floor. Jessica followed closely behind, her arms crossed. Amanda, my stepmother said, her tone sharp. We need to talk. I looked up from the table, holding one of the bank statements in my hand. Is this what you were looking for? I asked, my voice steady. She froze, her face going pale as her eyes landed on the paper spread out before me. This was my college fund, I said, holding up another document. You had no right to touch it. Jessica opened her mouth to say something, but Aunt Margaret cut her off. It was Amanda's money, she said firmly. You stole it. My stepmother glanced away, avoiding my gaze. I was planning to pay it back, she muttered, after we finished covering Jessica's education. Anger surged through me like a tidal wave. You've been lying to me for years, I said, standing up. You've taken everything from me. My money, my future, and my chance to have a life of my own. Jessica gave me a sarcastic smile, but I could see the cracks in her facade. It's not my fault you couldn't handle school, she said. Someone had to make the most of Dad's sacrifices. Her words hit me like a slap, but I didn't flinch. You've never thought about anyone but yourself, have you? I said, my voice low and steady. You let me work 2 jobs and give up everything. All so you could have the life you wanted. Jessica's smirk faded, but she said nothing. My stepmother tried to interrupt, but I held up a hand to stop her. "I'm done," I said firmly. "I've already spoken to a lawyer and I'm moving out. You'll be held accountable for everything you've done." Her face twisted in anger. "You can't just walk away from this family," she snapped. I met her gaze unflinching. "I already have." Moving into my small studio apartment felt like stepping into a new world. The space was tiny with just enough room for a bed, a table, and a few boxes of my belongings, but it was mine. For the first time in years I felt free. But the freedom came with its own set of challenges. The diner where I worked had cut everyone's hours, and the first tuition payment for my night classes loomed on the horizon. My savings were dwindling faster than I'd anticipated, and the weight of uncertainty hung heavy over me. One evening as I was unpacking, my phone buzzed with a text from Jessica. "Mom's in the hospital. She had a panic attack. I hope you're happy." My hands trembled as I read the message, but I didn't reply. I set the phone down and focused on organizing my kitchen supplies, trying to push the guilt out of my mind. Days turned into weeks, and I threw myself into my new life. I worked long shifts, studied late into the night, and saved every penny I could. Slowly but surely, I started to feel like I was rebuilding myself. Then one day I received a letter from a law firm. It was addressed to me and bore an official-looking seal. I opened it with shaky hands and read the words inside. "Dear Miss Adams, as the trustee of your father's estate, it is my duty to inform you of an additional account left in your name." My breath caught as I scanned the document. There was another inheritance, real estate, investments, and savings that my father had set aside for me. It was more than enough to cover my education and ensure I could live independently. For the first time in months, it felt like I could breathe. The letter from the law firm was proof that my father had believed in me all along. He had planned everything to ensure I had a chance to live my life on my own terms. I clutched the paper to my chest, tears spilling down my cheeks, overwhelmed by a mix of relief and gratitude. But life, as I had come to learn, rarely stayed smooth for long. 2 weeks later, I was sitting in my apartment, reviewing the paperwork to access the funds when my phone buzzed. It was a call from a number I didn't recognize. Hesitant, I answered. "Hello. Amanda, it's Clara," said a familiar voice. My heart sank. Clara was Aunt Margaret's neighbor. "There's been an accident," she continued, her tone somber. "Margaret was hit by a car this morning while crossing Main Street." I stood up so quickly my chair scraped against the floor. "What? Is she okay? Where is she?" I could barely keep the panic out of my voice. "She's at St. Mary's Hospital," Clara said. "She's in surgery now. It doesn't look good." The rest of the conversation blurred as I rushed to grab my keys. Within minutes, I was in my car, speeding toward the hospital. Aunt Margaret had been the only person in my life who had always been in my corner. The thought of losing her was unbearable. When I arrived at the hospital, I found Clara pacing near the waiting room. Her expression was grim. "She's still in surgery," she told me. "The doctors said she suffered severe internal injuries. They're doing everything they can." I sank into a chair, my mind spinning. Hours passed before a doctor finally approached, his face lined with exhaustion. "Are you Amanda?" he asked. "Yes," I said, standing up. "I'm her niece." He hesitated, and my stomach twisted at the look on his face. "Your aunt's condition is critical. She's stable for now, but she'll need additional surgeries and extended care to recover. The cost of her treatment will be significant." I felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. "How much are we talking about?" I asked, dreading the answer. The doctor's expression softened. "It's hard to say right now, but likely around $50,000 to $60,000 for the initial phase. You might want to consult with a hospital financial counselor." 50 to 60,000. The number echoed in my mind like a cruel joke. It was almost the exact amount my father had left me. That night, I sat alone in my apartment, staring at the stack of documents from my inheritance. The money was supposed to be my ticket to freedom, my chance to finally follow my dreams. But how could I even think about that while Aunt Margaret, the only family member who had ever truly cared about me, was fighting for her life? I thought about all the times she'd stepped up when no one else did. She had supported me, believed in me, and even protected my father's legacy when my stepmother tried to erase it. I couldn't turn my back on her now. Taking a deep breath, I picked up my phone and called the hospital's billing office. "I'm Amanda Adams, Margaret Gray's niece," I said. "I'd like to pay the deposit for her medical expenses." Over the next few weeks, life became a blur of hospital visits, work shifts, and paperwork. The inheritance covered half of Aunt Margaret's medical bills, but I knew it wouldn't last forever. I picked up extra shifts at the diner and cut back on my own expenses, determined to keep her care on track. One evening, as I sat by her bedside, she stirred for the first time since the accident. Her eyes fluttered open, and she looked around weakly before her gaze landed on me. "Amanda," she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm here," I said, leaning closer. Tears filled her eyes as she looked at me. "You shouldn't have to carry this burden." "It's not a burden," I said firmly. "You've always been there for me. Now it's my turn." She squeezed my hand, her grip weak but full of emotion. "Your father would be proud of you." Weeks turned into months, and slowly, Aunt Margaret began to recover. The strain of balancing her care with my own life was overwhelming, but it also taught me how resilient I could be. My dreams were on hold again, but this time it didn't feel like a loss. Felt like a choice. One afternoon, I came home from the hospital to find a letter waiting for me. It was from the law firm that had handled my father's estate. My hand shook as I opened it. "Dear Miss Adams," it read. "It has come to our attention that an additional account under your father's name has been located. The funds total approximately $200,000. I stared at the letter, unable to believe what I was reading. My father's careful planning had saved me again. For the first time in years, I felt like the universe was giving me a break. As Aunt Margaret continued to heal, I found a balance between supporting her and pursuing my own goals. I enrolled in night classes, determined to build a future that honored my father's belief in me. And though the road ahead was still uncertain, I knew one thing for sure. I had the strength to face whatever came next. Life had tested me in ways I never could have imagined, but I'd survived. And as I looked ahead, I realized that the challenges I'd faced had forged me into someone who could thrive.